Noise is everywhere, every day. Studies have found that excessive noise can do far more harm than just your hearing. If you think about your everyday life, all of us are subjected to various forms of noise pollution, all the time. This may include things like city buses and cars, things like planes and bikes, things like a noisy workplace, things like music events, snowmobile riding, and even, increasingly, playing music. So the higher the noise levels, the more likely you're going to get a crippling hearing loss, and make no mistake. Hearing loss is undoubtedly a crippling and very detrimental condition, but it is far from the only one that results from noise pollution. Over the last 20 years or so, we've heard about several other severe impacts of noise. In some cases, in fact, more severe than hearing loss. Chronic or long-term exposure to road and aircraft noise has been linked to increased risk of heart attack, and higher rates of high blood pressure or hypertension, and an elevated risk of neurological effects, especially in children.
How have you seen the impact of climate change on your patients and medical practice at the Children's Hospital?
Climate change is harmful to children, regardless of whether they are healthy or may have existing medical conditions and wherever they live. So we know that the torrential rains that we've seen, and are likely to see more as changes in climate continue to contribute to outbreaks of waterborne diseases. In the early 90s, a water filtration plant failed to adequately filter out cryptosporidium that was washed into the water supply by heavy rains, and almost half of the town's population had contracted cryptosporidiosis, the largest outbreak in our nation's history. But these outbreaks are happening more often, potentially because of torrential rains. I think the main point here is that we have a massive stake in the health of our children when it comes to changes in climate.
Could you also give us instances of the health impacts that you see in children affected by events related to climate change?
In 2015, I was practicing at Children's Hospital, and I was taking care of a patient who I needed to order intravenous fluids for, which, IV fluids form the foundation of medical care around the world. And when I placed my order, I received a notice that we were rationing IV fluids because of shortages. These shortages were the consequence of Hurricane Toria, which struck Venezuela the previous winter. So the hurricane, as you know, was a significant issue that really set Venezuela back, and also happened to destroy the infrastructure of the primary producer of pediatric IV fluid bags, and this resulted in a national shortage of critical IV liquids.
The extensive and profitable culture of mushrooms should be of interest to everybody. For domestic consumption, they are healthy and delicious food, and for the market, when successfully grown, they become the most profitable crop. America has the best market in the world for fresh mushrooms, the demand for which is increasing, and the supply has always been insufficient. The raising of mushrooms is within reach of nearly everyone. Suitable materials and careful attention to all practical details can give a decent profit. It provides indoor work in winter, and there is very little hard work connected to it.
No one can grow mushrooms better or more efficiently than a farmer. He's got the cellar room, the fresh compost, and the topsoil at home, and all he needs is some spawn, the starting materials to plant the beds. The manure used in mushroom beds is not exhausted of its fertility. Instead, it is well rotted and more fertile than it was before being prepared for the mushroom crop.
The farmer won't notice the little effort it takes. There is no secret whatever connected with it, and skilled labor is unnecessary to make it successful. The most common farm worker can do the task, which consists of turning the manure once every day or two, for about 3 weeks, then building it into a bed, and spawning and molding it. Nearly all the work for the next 10 or 12 weeks consists of maintaining an even temperature, and gathering and marketing the crop.
Adults are the foundation for the advancement of early childhood literacy. Therefore, literacy is not something which lies in a textbook, and it's not something that can be found in a syllabus. It resides in the space between an adult and the textbook, and the child, or the adult and the syllabus and the child. It's really the interactions with adults that trigger the potential that's in the books and the curriculum content to help a child learn how to read. Therefore, adults are the medium, if you like, for children to engage in literacy.
Adults promote the interest in language and involvement in deriving meaning from words, and the perception that children need to be able to learn how to read successfully. And adults are participating in some of the painstakingly complex and demanding ways to help children learn this difficult task.
You know, when you're trying to fit 26 letters to a lot of sounds, and find out how to apply the code to print, that's a difficult job, and someone needs to teach a kid how to do that. Adults in many ways inspire children to learn how to read, by providing basic language skills, for children to understand the importance of language and meaning, and then they offer some very basic reading comprehension skills. So it's all about the interactions involving adults and children.
Baklava is a rich, sweet pastry famous in many of the former Ottoman states. It consists of layers of phyllo dough filled with chopped nuts and sweetened with sugar syrup. Pastry makers in Turkey work hard to create the popular Turkish baklava dessert before the festivals. The origins of this fantastic delicacy are very controversial. The Turks, Arabs, Jews, Greeks, Armenians and Bulgarians who introduced baklava as their national dessert were once part of the Ottoman Empire. The earliest documents on baklava are available in Topkapı Palace kitchen notes from the Fatih era. Until the 19th century, baklava was considered a luxury that only the extremely wealthy and privileged could afford. People would only bake baklava on ceremonial occasions, religious festivals or weddings. Pastry makers are receiving orders not only from Turkey but also from Europe, as well as from the Middle East and the Far East. Shifts in the firms have doubled to meet the increasing demand. Baklava makers claim that orders have begun to come from a wider area, thanks to online orders. Baklava is now available in many varieties, and each variant has its devoted admirers, each of them being enjoyable in its own right. However, next time you take hold of this juicy treat, you should remember the rich Ottoman heritage this sweet is part of.
The problem of bullying, and its potential role in severe school violence, has been under investigation for nearly 20 years, by researchers and educators. In those 20 years, we've learned a lot about bullying. But today, the problem, and how schools handle it, is no less complicated. It is essential to look back and consider that creating a safe learning environment is linked directly to academic excellence.
Physical safety and mental safety are very closely linked together in the sense that, if I get punched in my face when I go to school, then I'm going to feel pretty bad about the school. I'm going to worry about my next day, if I'm going to get punched in my face by going back to school. Now that's a very extreme example of this, but it also goes into a lot of softer touches. If someone is going to create a fake social media profile of me, and say a bunch of silly things, that's a concern too.
A recent survey found that at least 6% of students participate in some form of digital self-harm, including using fake profiles to post controversial comments about themselves online or on social networks.
Although further research is needed on this social issue, many child psychologists equate this digital self-sabotage to physical self-injury, say cutting or burning, for instance. It is clear that the collective definition of what bullying is has evolved over the past decades. Student harassment is much more complicated than the stereotypical portrayal of a pupil being put in a locker or abused in the school corridor.
Thousands of teachers have been working from home since schools closed in March. But for many, the last few months have been challenging.
This is not vacation time for teachers. Some people think that they've got all this time. But they are working just as hard, if not harder, because they have to figure out the best ways to meet the children in this environment. There are many stories of our teachers rising to the challenge of COVID-19, how they have been affected mentally in their daily activities, and their interaction with students, and with each other.
As you said, this time has been no vacation for teachers. They have spent late nights learning new technologies, making online learning as accessible as possible for all learners, calling on parents to make sure they have the support they need, and also trying to reach missing students, even while managing their own homes and worries during this pandemic. During this time, so many teachers have been working to fulfill the academic and emotional needs of their students.
There has been an enormous amount of evidence that air quality has improved considerably during the lockdown in many locations, especially as vehicle traffic has decreased. Mostly because I live in a polluted city, I care about our pollution. And I think if we can't solve a local problem, which is a lot easier, there's nothing I can change in China or Vietnam. I don't need to change the power system in China to solve the local air pollution in the US, so it's got to be easier as a problem to solve. And on top of that, the people who live in the city, and who could fix the problem, also experience the damage. So why can't we solve a simple issue when it's so clear and in front of everyone's eyes? Is it because we don't have enough data? So people could read in the paper that the quality of the city's air is poor, but maybe they don't have enough necessary information. They don't even know where the pollution comes from, what the causes are, and the potential risks to their lives.
We can all see that droughts, increasing temperatures and flooding are affecting more and more nations, but how will the people who already live in water-scarce places adapt? Will water be privatized and turned over to big companies, or is it better left in government ownership?
1 billion people worldwide need access to clean water, another billion are malnourished, and another 2 billion people are expected to be living within the next 3 decades. This means that the demand for water supplies will increase significantly over the next few decades.
There are many places in the world where we still have, even though it is the 21st century, failed to fulfill basic human needs for safe drinking water and sanitation. There are vast numbers of people who do not have access to the kind of water facilities that most of us in the developed wealthier countries accept as normal, every day, and that is a serious issue.
Coral reefs are the world's most massive biological structures. It's hard to imagine that such massive structures can be built by tiny little coral polyps over thousands of years. And you would think that because corals have been around for ages, they'll be around for many centuries to come. But this is not always the case. Scientists have found that corals are in deep trouble. And a global movement is underway to do something about it. The National Coral Reef Monitoring Program is closely examining locations in the proximity of our high-density reef states and territories. Now, this monitoring project is pretty complicated, but what you need to know is that it's about scientists bringing high-quality data to people who need it, and that helps us make informed choices about preserving and conserving our reefs. The socioeconomic component aims to look at the linkages between people and coral reefs. We are looking at both sides of the coin. We want to learn about positive connections, how people rely on reefs, respect and use reefs, and look at some of the negatives as well.